Our scripture reading is taken from Matthew 12, 1 and 2. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were a-hungered and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day.
At one point, I was going to change the title of this sermon and just call it "Day in the Life of Jesus." You know, every one of us, we have every day for each one of us, we don't know what comes. We get up in the morning and thankful for getting up, and we go about, and the twists and turns of life, they come and they go quite often. With the 3 people in the church already with wounded wings, we might be looking at hopefully no more wounded wings. Life brings some interesting challenges. Anyway. One day Jesus and his disciples were walking through the grain field, being hungry and nothing to eat. As the scripture said, they stopped and took some grain and enjoyed a handful of food to nourish their bodies. Everything went well for the most part, except for one small detail. It was done on the Sabbath. This action was deemed as harvesting on the Sabbath. It qualified for law breaking. Now, it just so happens that there were some Pharisees. Some Pharisees saw this and were greatly disturbed by this action. They accused Jesus and his disciples promptly of breaking the Sabbath. It was within this context that both Jesus and the Pharisees wished to discuss. The Pharisees wished to nail Jesus on the issue of what was lawful to do on the Sabbath and what was not. On the other hand, Jesus wished to present his case of human care. Jesus wished them to comprehend that the Sabbath was an opportunity to do good. So, obviously, a showdown was looming. Jesus went to the synagogue. He entered their domain. This was where they were in control, the Pharisees in essence. This is where they taught. The story picks up in Matthew 12, verse 10. And it says, And behold, a man having a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So they might accuse him. Now, we don't necessarily immediately think about it, but we will this morning. What was a man with a withered hand doing at the synagogue? Sometimes we just kind of overlook something that was kind of should be obvious. There were some cases in the New Testament where people with health issues were found in the synagogue. On the other hand, the religious leaders often used banishment from the synagogue as punishment. Having a withered hand makes this man a what? A sinner. Having withered hand made him liable to be punished also by God. Having a withered hand made the Pharisees wanting to assist God in his punishment of the sinner, such as banishment, synagogue. Being banished from the synagogue resulted in shame. That would have been obvious. Obvious really to everyone. To the Pharisees that banished him, to anyone that might be attending the synagogue. Matter of fact, the entire community. It wasn't just the shame of the man with the withered hand that had to deal with this day after day with everyone that he met throughout the day. But everyone basically knew why individuals were banned from the synagogue. John chapter 9, verse 22, it says, referring to banishment, his parents spoke these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, that he should be put out of the synagogue. John the 12th chapter, verse 42. Still, however, even out of the rulers, many did believe in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. It was important for people to come to worship. Important for people to come to the synagogue and praise the Lord. When you have that mentality, that urgency, and even that impression that, where do you go Sabbath? Where do we go Sabbath? To church. This man might have been in the synagogue by invitation of the Pharisees because they knew that Jesus would wish to heal him. He might have been placed there as a temptation for Jesus to break their law, sin, because it was still the Sabbath. Wishing to catch Jesus breaking the law here in the synagogue where witnesses were present, rather than being satisfied with just perhaps in the field where perhaps only the Pharisees saw him transgressing the law. The Pharisees knew Jesus healed people wherever he went. It was interesting that what this taught really us about Jesus, that he was a caring person, caring for those who suffered. But before we continue, it has to be stated that Jesus never broke God's moral law. 2 Corinthians 5th chapter, verse 21. It says, "For he has made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him." 1 Peter 2:22. "He who did not sin, nor was guile found in his mouth." The Pharisees did not only believe in according to the moral law or the Mosaic law, but they also believed and taught according to the tradition of the elders. The tradition of the elders was a contemporary commentary, or interpretation of the Mosaic law as transmitted and expanded over many centuries. These commentaries were actually codified. We don't want to put too much blame that direction, because sometimes we do very much like the Pharisees did. Maybe our laws in regards to the Ten Commandments or God's moral law may not necessarily be written down, but on the other hand, most of you realize that as you have looked in the past, that the laws were there. In other words, we made our own laws as to what to do on the Sabbath or what not to do. Is there anyone here that doesn't have that? Every one of us have lived that out in one way or another. Pharisees believed these commentaries were valid and had to be obeyed. They referred to these traditions as laws or you might say the law. When they accused Jesus of breaking the law, they were actually referring to the tradition or interpretation of the law. Jesus did not break the Ten Commandments. Jesus only broke their interpretation of their rules with regard to Sabbath keeping. An example would be, these laws were called legalistic. Oh, you've heard that word before, haven't you? Legalistic laws, as the Pharisees believed that if anyone kept all of these laws perfectly well for 1 or 2 Sabbaths, they would legally be reconciled to God, and then the Messiah would come. Oh. Have you heard of something like that in the past? You know, if the church would only come together and be unified and do what is right, then, well, I'll say it, you won't. Then Jesus will come. The reason why Jesus has not come is because what? Because of us. We're breaking the laws. I've had that hinted over the years, since being a Seventh-day Adventist, numerous times. Let me give a few quotes here in regards to these laws, trying to explain the Mosaic laws. Jews will be redeemed by virtue of their Sabbath observance. This is Rabbah 3:1. If Israel kept properly 1 Sabbath, the Son of David would come. For Sabbath is equivalent to all other commandments. Rabbah 25:12. If Israel observed 2 Sabbaths, they would be redeemed immediately. Shabbat 118b. The Pharisees became the Sabbath police. Now, I'm glad to report that within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or it could be the Baptist Church, Catholic Church, it doesn't matter. There are no police in the church. Sabbath or Sunday police, whatever you want to call it, are there. I grew up attending a congregational church in a small town of 500. Every Sunday, we were in church. If we weren't, we were either dead or very, very sick. There was no ifs, ands, buts about it. We were in church. And all the church members were there too. Never failed. Matter of fact, I was one of those individuals that at that age, well, as a child growing up almost to the teens, we had to sit in one of the first couple pews of the church. Our parents were back behind. Matter of fact, the men were on one side and the women were on the other. That's the way it was for quite some time. I remember it well. Sunday was sacred, holy. Where they got those ideas from, I don't know. But they had it in their minds. There was one grocery store in town, and the owner of the grocery store approached my dad and asked him if he would replace floor tile in the store. The store was only closed on Sundays, so it really had to be done on Sundays. I can still see my mother's reaction when my dad shared with her that he was going to do it. Oh, she was fiery mad. Working on the Sabbath was out of the question. Growing up, about the only thing you did on Sunday was milk the cows, feed the chickens. Winter time, maybe throw out some bales. That was the extent of it. At lunchtime after church, many times we'd have maybe the preacher or someone else, other families come over and have lunch together. That was Sabbath. Or for them, for us at that time, that was Sunday. That was Sunday keeping. We all have our rules, our guidance. We were going to Southwestern Adventist University College at that point, and we became friends with this other couple. They were just a few years, I think, maybe a few years younger than we were. And they had two small children, very small children. Sabbath afternoons, we'd get together with them, pile in a van that we had, and we'd drive to this park south of Cleburne, Texas, someplace. In this huge area, there was a stream that ran through there, and there was this little waterfall. It might have, dropped water about that far. That is about it. But there was water there, and water was running. I still remembered. It was all right for the kids to take their shoes off and stand in the water, but to get any wetter than that was wrong to do on the Sabbath. Do you folks remember any Sabbath rules that you had? And there were people watching to make sure that they were kept. Just the other Sabbath, that's probably been about 3 weeks ago or so. At the other church, we had special music. A lady and her daughter, I guess she had two daughters, they did special music. The one daughter, she had the skirt that almost covered something. It's normal. You see that all over. Just go to a mall. You don't have to go to a mall. Walk the street, But I heard a few comments afterwards in regards to her. I'm glad that they did not talk to her directly, but, those are rules. Like the Pharisees, our rules may not be codified, but they're there. We make them up. We interpret how a Sabbath should be kept. We interpret how to love our neighbor or whatever. We have those rules upstairs. Again, the Pharisees became the Sabbath police. They confronted everyone who broke the Sabbath law. This is why they took great offense when someone broke the Sabbath law. After all, the person breaking the Sabbath law was responsible for the Messiah's delay. Breaking the Sabbath was bad enough, but to teach and instruct others to break the Sabbath law was incomprehensible. This was what they believed that Jesus had done. They were seeking definitive proof in their synagogue with a direct question and an enticing temptation with a man with a withered hand looking on. The trap was set for Jesus. Here was, that was set here was based on was not based on the Mosaic law, but rather based on their laws, which they referred to as the tradition of the elders. This tradition, in fact, did provide for medical attention on the Sabbath, but such attention was limited to situations where people were either in danger of losing their life or experiencing pain. Those were the rules. Quoting from them, saving a life supersedes the Sabbath. Eliezer ben Ezra Meketa on Exodus 31, verse 13. No Sabbath laws apply where life is in danger. Matthiah ben Hesser, Mishnah Yoma 8:6. To save a life, disregard the Sabbath, that the endangered may enjoy many Sabbaths. Simeon ben Manasseh, Talmud, Yama 85a. You may violate the Sabbath to relieve pain. Meta ben Harish, Yama 84a. Based on these traditions of the Pharisees would expect any expect any Jew to agree with them that it was not lawful to heal on the Sabbath where there was no danger of life or suffering of pain. Healing a man with a withered hand would not constitute healing the individual on the Sabbath. They realized that he was not in danger and he was not in pain. So healing could have been done the next day, the next week, a month from now, 5 years from now, but not on the Sabbath. The Pharisees wanted Jesus to comply with these traditions as they were regarded as more than just traditions. They were looked upon as laws. Jesus responds in the 12th chapter, verse 11, and he said to them, "What man among you will be who will have one sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath? Will he not lay hold on it and lift it out?" Now the Pharisees thought that they had every angle covered. The quote states clearly that medical help could be rendered when a person suffered pain or was in danger. Jesus too quoted from their tradition, stating that sustenance was to be provided for animals having fallen into a cistern or pit. At nightfall, the animal could be rescued. If, however, the animal was not in danger of not surviving the day, tools, for example, a mattress, could be permitted to be carried out and used to save the animal. It should be noted that this was a controversial issue. The rules concerning this issue was constantly being changed well after Matthew wrote this gospel. Jesus countered the quote. Counter quote was in the form of a question rather than an emphatic statement. Jesus put the question in a negative, not a lay hold. Thus Jesus was asking whether anyone did not agree with his understanding of the tradition. Since the Pharisees did not object to the question or raise controversy over it, and since it was was asked in such a way as to solicit disagreement, it might be assumed that they agreed with it. This meant that they were consenting to its conclusion. Now came Jesus' follow-up question. If you are willing to assist the animal, why were you not willing to assist the man with a withered hand? The Pharisees were the experts in the Mosaic law. They were used to dissecting it, separating emotion from it, and majoring in the minute and small and trivial details. They could point to the fact that the man with the withered hand was not in danger of losing his life, nor was he in pain. Jesus did not debate this particular case. He did not speak about the disabled man. Instead, he questioned their traditions. He was judging their legal religious system, pointing out how merciless and unfair this system was in making provisions for an animal, but not for a human being. Jesus put their law on trial and demonstrated that their law elevated animals above humans. Now Jesus reversed their hierarchy. Verse 12. How much better is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Who is going to say that it was not lawful to do well on the Sabbath? Jesus renders this law really a joke. If it was lawful to assist an animal without it being in danger, and a human being was worth more than an animal, then surely it ought to be also lawful to assist a human being. Jesus has never been known for placing his own interests above others. Jesus cared a great deal about those who suffered. This man, with his withered hand, certainly suffered socially as a reject. Who would want to be around a man with a withered hand? Matter of fact, even today, someone that isn't quite right, what do? We try to avoid him. He would rather expose himself to trouble than letting this suffering continue. By now the Pharisees probably knew that Jesus was going to disregard them and their laws and heal the man. That was probably why he was placed there to begin with. Perhaps Jesus looked on their faces for any hint of hope or mercy in the faces of these Pharisees. Maybe hoping for the softening of their hearts, wishing they could place themselves in the position of the man with the withered hand. Actually, in our conversations, we have a tendency to do that. We talk about somebody, maybe of what they've done, or how they look, or how they act, or we fail to place ourselves in their place. Would it make a difference? Maybe not. Obviously, it did not make a difference here for the Pharisees. The man with the withered hand knew that he was being used by the Pharisees as a test against Jesus. There was no doubt in his mind. He saw the contrast between Jesus' caring expression and that of this hard, cold, and emotionless Pharisees. The Pharisees would rather have this man suffering or even sacrificed than for Jesus to win the battle. Just that alone, put it in today's concept of where we're living today and what's going on in the world. If you don't win, you do what? I wish that was the end. You do lose, but you get back. You try to get even. You get down low. An expression that has been used a number of times over the past few years. More so probably in politics. But it's just not in politics. In everyday life. None of us want to be proven wrong, do we? No. None of us. We'd rather be right. But if we're not right, what good does it do to dig in our heels and make things worse? People were important to Jesus, verses 13 and 14. Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your arm." And he stretched it out, and it was restored whole like the other. Then the Pharisees went out, and they counseled against him as to how they might destroy him. That's typical of most people, maybe us. The Pharisees lost this battle against Jesus, as indicated by their leaving the synagogue. During public debate, the losers always left. They realized they were not going to solve or end the Jesus problem by means of making Jesus destitute of honor. That's right. Purpose was to make Jesus destitute of honor. If you have honor, people accept you and follow you, don't they? If you're dishonored, what happens? Nobody wants anything to do with you. That's what they tried to do with Jesus. Take away his honor. If the Pharisees could succeed in causing Jesus to be without honor, no one would have wanted to pay any attention to him. The problem with their strategy was that Jesus was much smarter than them combined. Hate to put it in those terms, but in essence, he was. Well, in essence, he was God. Their strategy, every time that Jesus won, and I hate to put it in kind of a competition of win-lose situation, but in essence, you understand what I mean. It wasn't that Jesus wanted to humiliate people, make fools out of them, but by just doing right, doing good. Every time Jesus won a contest such as this, their strategy backfired because they lost honor instead of Jesus. That is perhaps why a change had to be made, change in course. The Pharisees' strategy against Jesus shifted from questioning him, attempting to take away his honor, to attempting to trick him so that they could take him to court and try to have him killed. The Pharisees left the synagogue to figure out how they might destroy Jesus. Drastic measures were now needed to resolve the Jesus problem. That sounds too familiar even in our day. Their loss meant triumph for Jesus and the man with the withered hand. Luke told us that the Pharisees were filled with anger. The Pharisees responded by taking the battle to the next level. They agreed to destroy Jesus. This decision confirmed the hardness of their hearts. To save society, they felt it necessary to sacrifice Jesus. Cut and dry. It was Jesus' selflessness that brought healing to the man with a withered hand. Ironically, it was Jesus' sacrifice, which the Pharisees orchestrated, that made salvation possible even for the Pharisees. The Pharisees were actually right. Sacrificing Jesus did bring salvation. Not the type of salvation that they had in mind, but salvation from sin and death. That's Jesus. Let's turn to a closing hymn. Jesus saves. Jesus saves.